Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. So, I got another character concept for you all today. A while ago, someone asked me to do something with dwarves, and it took me a while to really think of something. I wanted to do something a bit unique, maybe a different take on it. I didn't want to just do really generic dwarven fantasy. So, I have a premise that I think is very on brand still and could work with a pre existing setting, takes it in a direction I think is a little bit more interesting, and gives a trait that could be used as both a cool like cultural centerpiece, so maybe a certain clan does it, or it can be a premise for a villain faction. My inspiration for this is dwarven rune crafting. So rune crafting is a very common thing associated with dwarves. The mining, the construction, all that. Very, very generic fantasy. But I've been watching a playthrough of God of War Ragnarok, and there's a part of the game where they have the ability to use magic to put the souls of things into other things. And I was thinking, they always talk about these runes and there's these runes of power and all this, and items will have these runes. Why don't we explore, where this power comes from and how we're enchanting these runes and using the souls of the forgotten? And in Total War Warhammer, the first one, there's the guy that specializes in rune crafting, and there's the guy that has all of his ghost buddies, and the dwarves in the Warhammer setting had this whole like book of grudges, and it's all about keeping track of all the wrongs that were done to them and their history, and making sure that they right any wrongs against them. This kind of emphasis on keeping a record, also, I kind of want to bring into this. So I was seeking for more of the good or the neutral kind of take of this is that they use these runes to store their ancestors as a way to like collect their knowledge, to have this library of, maybe it's a hall with all these like pillars and all these different runes, and you could consult, basically the knowledge of all the ancestors of this clan. And that could be a way to do an oral tradition where they might not have like written books, but the seers or the rune smiths would have the ability to go to these places and use an incantation to basically learn anything any dwarf whose soul is collected there would know, and their seers or the most learned people would be stored in that way. Well, maybe their most powerful fighters would be enchanted into things like weapons and armor, and would act as kind of a guardian to assist you. They would teach you how to train. You'd pick up a hammer that was wielded by this great fighter, and it's a sentient weapon that would teach you how to fight that way. And you see this a lot in fantasy, this idea of like a sentient weapon. It's a very common premise. Usually it's more evil. So I thought maybe having a culture that reveres these things and uses them to improve their capabilities would be interesting. And of course, you could do this where this was like an ancient thing and they're long dead. You could go the Stormlight Archive route with it. This is a spoiler, by the way. So I don't know, click like 30 seconds ahead if you're worried. Where the people that made the blades are dead, and when you touch the blades, you can hear the screaming and the pain of the soul that's trapped within it. If you want to go the more evil way, you could have stuff like that going on. I'm gonna explore more evil options here shortly, but I want to kind of build a foundation first. Then you can really think about how that would change things, like dwarves having ancestral homes, mountains and keeps, which is typically how they're done, and why they're more hesitant to leave those places or they guard them fiercely, could be because like literally, the writings on these walls are their ancestors, and they're some of all their knowledge. You could make it where if they lose one of these special weapons, maybe in a fight or something, it's a really big deal to them, and they will go through extreme lengths to recover them. And not every weapon they wield will have, one of these magical traits will probably be bestowed to people of higher standing, or, warriors of extreme renown might have a full set. I wouldn't make it where like every dwarf has access to one. Then that would be a bit much. Because most of them would probably be kept more so for training, while, the strength of a powerful warrior might be imbued into a specific weapon. So whenever you swing with it, you hit as hard as they do. And I think it's more interesting if you break the soul up into different bits and maybe they can't capture all of it. So like either you can it's very rare to have something that makes you more powerful and can talk to you, you know? Like in the Ragnarok they talk about I think it's the four pieces of a soul and how you need all of them to be a full person. You can kind of go that way where you can have, the strength of the individual, the thing that like their life force empowers the object but it's not sentient, and or you can have something that just has like the mind of the individual, so it's like all their knowledge and their personality, but that's it doesn't like imbue them with any special abilities. And then the things that would have both would be super rare and super powerful, so that way you could kind of get around the fact of they have this stuff but not every single one of them is like a super soldier. Although having a few that are super badass could make for an excellent either ally or enemy. And I think getting away from books necessarily and having more of like an oral tradition is very fantasy, like have it where they like don't read in their society. And like the rune crafters are the only ones that like and even know how to read the runes because it's like an oral tradition. You can kind of go that way. You can make them very traditional and like respectful and honor culture. They like respect other fighters and things, and they might have some runes that are of other races that were very accomplished fighters, and they respected them to the point where they brought them into their clan, and they were bestowed the honor of being put into a rune, which is incredibly rare for outsiders. You could make it where they're very hesitant to let people into their places. They're like well-renowned warriors. I mean, you can do the gunpowder kind of thing if you want to, or dwarves are like really good at making machines and engineering. I tend to have more like gnomes be the ones that do that kind of stuff with the engineering and the black powder and all that. If you want to have like the more modern dwarves, and maybe these are like the dwarves that hold on to the old ways and they only use like crossbows and much like the Total War character. The reason why they hold on to their older ways is because they know the skills of rune carving and rune crafting, while other people have moved on to more invention and things like that. So you can have maybe they're dying out or their culture is much less. Maybe it's only like the mountain dwarves that do this, while like the hill dwarves are much more modern and they're the ones you see very commonly. You could go that way with it. Or you could make it where it's the dwarves that live in the Underdark, and maybe they had to pick up this practice to fight against the Elder Brains, mind flayers that lurk down in the Underdark. So that we've kind of established maybe a bit of about the culture and how that would affect it, how that would change. Maybe instead of using writing, they use rune crafting, storing knowledge, and things of that nature. I kind of want to explore more of how you could do this in more of a villainy way. Now, the first thing that comes to mind is them using their soul stealing abilities to like weld souls together, create abominations. You could have it where they create automatons, and the reason why they would need automatons is because they're fighting a great force, and their people don't breed quick enough where they can fight against these insurmountable odds. You can have an enemy that is just vast in number, or you can do something like abelisks or mind flayers, things of that nature that are very good at targeting biological creatures. So they had to create these engines of war, and out of their desperation, much like the Eldar, they are using like the souls of the dead, and then you could take it more into like Drukari realm. They're like twisting their various people together and various souls together. Maybe they're abducting people from the overworld, and that's how you find out about them. People keep going missing, and they're being turned into these weapons of war, and these weapons of war are being sent to fight off the mind flayers. And it's kind of a thing where initially you're like, oh, these guys are the bad guys, but really they're the only thing stopping us from getting completely overrun by this larger threat that they did, find out about from trying to stop them. That could be a really interesting way of doing it where, early game, they're trying to, it's like a mystery. People keep disappearing. They find these raiding parties. They go to, stop it. In learning about from fighting them, they kind of like learn about the culture. Maybe they get access to one of those magic items that have a sentient being in it. And they're basically informed through that item of the way of the war that's going on under beneath, and the fact that they're kind of lost their way. Maybe they're on the back foot. Maybe they're really losing. So they have deviated from their tradition and they're creating these like awful things at a last attempt to save the overworld from being completely overrun by these, numerous mind flayers. And that could be a really interesting way of doing it. So they're doing something obviously terrible, like you can't even resurrect these people because their souls are gone. So that's a big thing. If you're playing a very high fantasy world where like, the local temple can cast Revivify, they might not have access to true resurrection, but they have access to most of the resurrection abilities. And if you need a true resurrection, you go to the big city where there's like a higher level cleric that can do it for you. If you're playing one of those kind of campaigns, you can add some real stakes with like, hey, if you get killed by these guys, they can literally rip your soul from your body, and if you don't track down the gem or whatever, the gem or stone that your companion's soul has been sucked into, you can't get them back. You need that item to be next to the body. Or if you wouldn't even go further, you would need to know the incantation to put the soul back into the body and then cast the resurrection spell to bring the flesh back to life. Because obviously, if there's no soul in it, it's not going to stay alive for very long. And you can also go the route of, if you want to get into the body horror kind of stuff, you can look at the like engines of chaos and all that, where things are meshes between flesh and metal, and they have to twist the souls and turn them into these. They take humanoids and they turn them into these horrific beasts with magic and adding, augmenting them with metal and parts, and that way they're like running off of a furnace of souls, and that's the only thing keeping going to make these giant war machines that they have to feed bodies to keep going. It's like, well, yeah, it's like this horrible, awful thing, but maybe they're doing it for a good reason. Maybe it's like a Emperor Man kind of situation where it's like, yeah, do we throw a bunch of psychers into this every single day, murdering, I think it's 10,000 psychers get killed a day. Maybe it's 100,000 psychers are killed a day to keep the emperor alive. But if, for some reason he goes down, they lose all navigation across, they lose all navigation, everything gets shut off. It's like the dark times again. All those worlds won't be able to get the supplies they need. So, every single one that's outside of Earth will probably die rapidly because they don't have the reinforcements and supplies and food they need. It's like you can do something like that where they're doing something terrible, but they're the like last line of defense against something really, really awful. Much like my other video, it depends on how dark you want to get. I do just think the very respectful of the dead, very reverent of people's past experience, a culture of it's all about, the life you live and what you accomplish, taking taking your path, your choice, if you have the path of the warrior, path of the scholar, to an absolute extreme because you want to be the best possible. Because if you're good enough, you will literally be used as the expert for all time. So having like people that are super specialized, these super specialized scholars and these super specialized warriors that are just exceptional in their one area because they will be the model to train future ones. I think that could be also really interesting. So maybe like if you have a fighter and you want to give them some unique abilities, maybe they have to seek out one of these people who's a master in that one technique, and no one in the world's better than them. And when they die, they will be put into that type of weapon that they're the master of, and they'll be used to train other people. And other people will, have to learn. The average troop will want to learn multiple different things to be more well rounded, right? The average troop will. And then once you kind of get to a point where you've deemed yourself good enough, you would specialize and maybe make your own craft from the knowledge of those that came before you. And same thing with scholars, maybe like you want to learn spells, like you want to throw in some stuff that's kind of third party, like chronomancy or something. Maybe the dwarves are the only one that has someone that specializes in chronomancy. Or maybe if necromancy is like super forbidden in your setting, like no one's allowed to know necromancy, well, the dwarves probably have a dude that specializes in necromancy on the wall somewhere. It might be very frowned upon now. It might be all the books were burned, but not anyone's just allowed into their, their hold. Not everyone knows, what each rune is, or like what souls are in each thing, so that it's not like they would know the knowledge is there to destroy it or even how to if they wanted to. So you can kind of have these people be the one-stop shop for knowledge that was lost as well. I also think it might be kind of a cool thing to do that maybe if they fight like a really difficult creature and there is a runesmith there, maybe they could enchant their weapon with the ability of it. So maybe they kill, for example, a giant creature of fire, right? And you can bring the like heart or head of the creature to one of these people and they can be like, okay, you kill this incredibly powerful beast. I can, yank the strength of it from its life force out, put in your weapon, and then now your weapon does like whatever damage, fire damage or whatever. And that could be kind of a cool way to let players build up their weapons, over time, where it's like, oh, you do all these cool things, they build up over time. Obviously, there would be a limit to it of how many runes you'd be able to put on a particular weapon. I'd be inclined to say one, right? Like the first one, probably pretty easy, but I imagine the more you want to do, the more difficult it would be. So the requirements for that I would make, scale really high, but having a more powerful soul to put into the weapon than the previous one will make it an upgrade anyways. That could be a good way if you want to give them, for example, you have a magic item in the book you really like, but it's a warhammer and they like double-handed swords. If you want a cool like narrative reason why they can forge you a really cool weapon of choice with the abilities typically associated with a different type of weapon, that would be a good narrative reason for it to occur. Of course, enchanting armor. Basically, if you want to give your players just any cool ability and you need a narrative reason, this could be a great way of doing it. It gives them a nice kind of use in game for enchantments. You could have stones that are one-time use as well that, shatter after one use because it's a weaker spirit. Narratively, it's just a different way of giving your players access to things. It has a cool kind of culture you can do to build around it. You have a way it could go evil, really kind of twisted, but also you could use them to be a sympathetic villain, which is something that, again, I always say I like to do. I always like to have a villain that's doing something that you can kind of understand where they're coming from or where they can relate to. But yeah, I don't know if this is what you were expecting when you asked me to cover dwarves. But I thought it was different enough of a take on dwarves that it warranted being made. Hopefully, this will inspire you to do something cool with dwarves. Of course, you don't have to make them a dwarf. You can just steal this premise and make it any race. I just picked dwarves because the rune carving and the blacksmithing and all that is very on brand for them. So I thought this kind of idea worked well with them. Do you have any other ideas or races you would like me to kind of think about? Let me know in the comments below. Maybe I'll think of a cool spin on them. It might take me like 2 months, like I did for this one. But, you never know. I keep a list of ideas, and I look at them every once in a while, and then sometimes I'm in the shower, and I think of a cool take on it, and then I make a video like this, but it doesn't always work out that way, so I'm sorry if I don't get to your suggestion. Also, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and do so. I'm a newer channel, so I don't have many of y'all, so I would appreciate the support and the like as well, because 'cause it'll make it where more people get to see this. Thank you for watching.